Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm David. I'll be one of your panelists as well as our moderator today. We're going to give everyone a chance to kind of get together and join. So we'll start in a minute or two. But while you're joining, if you want to go ahead and drop in the chat where you're calling in from, we're always curious where folks are around the U.S., around the world. But feel free, get settled, give us a minute or two to get everyone in here, and then we will get started with the content. Hey everyone, if you're just joining, go ahead and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead and drop in the chat where you're calling in from. We'll give us just a minute or so while we get everyone to join, and we'll be right with you. Got a lot of Canada coming in. First 2 out of 3 from Calgary and Vancouver. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. I see some more New York City folks. I think there's a lot of those joining us. I'm David. I'm based in Austin, Texas. You'll hear a lot more from me, but feel free, keep joining, post in the chat where you're calling in from. We'll give everyone just another minute or so, and then we'll get started with the content. Okay, we're going to get started in about 15 to 20 more seconds. Thanks everyone for joining. We've got a good group joining us from all over. If you haven't already, drop in the chat where you're calling in from. Feel free, we're going to use the chat and the Q&A function throughout this webinar. We've got folks from both the Aleph and the MAVI team manning the chat, and so we'll make sure that we're going to answer some questions along the way, but feel free, drop them in there and we'll weave your questions in. And we've also got some dedicated time at the end of our session to go through some live Q&A as well from the questions. So we got another Canada one. Wow, we might have more people in Canada than I expected normally.
Yeah, wow. International audience.
Oh, we've got some India. Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're a couple minutes past the hour. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. My name's David. I'm the head of CFO Partnerships here at Aleph. Joining me is Aman Puri, who's the co-founder of MAVI. We're really excited to have you all here today to talk about the new finance team. Many of you saw the webinar description, but I'll just give a quick intro of what we're going to cover today. The old finance playbook was, we think that model is breaking. It used to be you're a new head of finance. Your first role is normally hiring a US-based senior analyst that costs somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $100,000, and you just repeat that process. And that worked when the tooling was really thin and when there wasn't great access to global talent, or it wasn't available at all sorts of the business sizes. And so what we're going to do today, Aman and I will introduce ourselves. We'll talk a lot about what we're both seeing in the market, both from a recruiting perspective, from a company perspective, and a tooling, and try and bring all of the things that we all are hearing in some of our conversations into tangible action items that you all can leave here with, to really kind of rethink this process of, as you all are building and scaling your finance teams, what that next role or next hire could look like, and how it may have changed from what you did 6 months ago, 12 months ago, or even a couple of years ago. It feels like things are changing so fast. So let's go ahead and we can pull the slides down, but where I'd like to start is just doing some quick intros. Aman, I'll turn it over to you if you want to give the audience a quick intro of yourself and kind of who you're, what you're here for. I'll do the same, and then we'll dive right into the content.
Perfect. Thanks so much, David. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Aman. I'm the founder and CEO of MAVI. We're the world's first AI-driven talent marketplace, connecting the top 2% of global talent with US companies for in-house roles. Just some background on myself. My career has been in finance. So it did M&A and capital markets in New York and Morgan Stanley for a number of years before moving to the Bay Area, joining the SoftBank Vision Fund as one of the first fintech investors on that team. Invested over $1 billion of capital and worked with some of the most disruptive founders, and ultimately was very close to the problems finance leaders were facing by being in the fintech space. And that's where we came across the sort of massive accountant shortage, and that combined with what we're seeing right now with AI is what's kind of sparking this conversation of what does a future team look like. So excited to get into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Aman, for joining us, and thanks for bringing all the insight to the market. Just a quick intro of myself. My name's David. I run the fractional CFO channel here at Aleph. I've spent my whole career on the other side of finance from Aman. I've been in-house at early stage startups, being the head of finance multiple times in my career, and facing a lot of these decisions that many of us here on the call today are faced. I've hired analysts. I've not had tooling. This was all in a pre-AI world. And I joined the Aleph team to help work with fractional CFO firms to help them figure out how to implement tooling and scale their business. I'm based here in Austin, Texas, and I'll play moderator and also content creator for today. We're going to launch our first poll just as Aman and I start talking, just to give us an idea of kind of like who's in the audience and what your team looks like today. We're going to launch just a quick poll of like, help us understand, what does your finance team look like today? We know that we've got folks ranging from it's just you and you're trying to figure it out to I've got a team of more than 10. Help us kind of understand where you're at in the spectrum, and we'll come back to these results in a little bit. But feel free, keep responding to the poll. If you missed out, also feel free to drop it in the chat where you're dialing in from as well. So with that, while the poll's kind of running in the background, I guess Aman, where I want to start is just some of the challenges that we're facing today and how the model has really changed from what you and I talked about early on is before it was, a new head of finance is joining and they're being asked to do more than probably what they got signed up to do. And there's more work to be done than hours in the day. Talk to us a little bit about kind of like what you're seeing in the market and the conversations that you're having with companies and firms, and kind of give us a lay of the land of what you're seeing in the market today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. I think that is a big challenge that everyone is facing in terms of how should they structure their finance teams today in the context of a couple of the big challenges that I mentioned earlier. One is a massive shortage of talent that we're seeing in the finance and accounting realm in North America. There's a huge accountant shortage. 75% of CPAs are graduating. Even on the FP&A side, it's become incredibly difficult to find really high quality talent at speed. And then you put that on top of the context of today, where obviously AI is blowing up. Everyone is using Claude, and every single board is pushing their leadership team to do more with less. And CFOs are being told like you need to run a one-person finance team, and so it is becoming challenging for them to think about how can they actually achieve the objectives of the finance function and keep the business running and the engine running while being sort of cost effective and cost efficient. So that's definitely a huge challenge that we're seeing. David, I'm curious if you're sort of hearing and seeing similar things.
Seeing the same things, and a lot of what I hear in talking to companies and firms is that, well, I'm going to prioritize AI spend instead of maybe deploying my next finance hire. And what we found, and I think Ramp has some great research on this as well, is that companies that are actually spending more on AI are actually hiring at a faster pace than those that aren't. And so what we're seeing, especially in the use of our own tool, is that companies that are able to find scale and efficiency, they're actually able to tackle more projects and more meaningful work within the individual company to help the business grow faster and stronger, because you're able to really deputize some of those more like analyst level work items to agents and AI. And then ultimately be able to use that to provide better insights. And I think we've got a quick slide that we're going to pull up, which is some of this research here, is that on average, what I'm hitting on is the very bottom, which is those heavy adopters are actually growing at 10.2% for firms that are adopting AI over 2 years faster than other companies that are not adopting AI. So it's a little bit of a misconception in the market of like, it's either or, I'm hiring for AI, using AI, or I'm hiring. We're actually seeing that it's a lot of both. And then it's also being more strategic about where am I going to deploy that hiring, and how am I going to have that person contribute the highest value, instead of having to always bring maybe a more junior level analyst to the table to do more of what I'll call the grunt work. We're seeing a lot more of that being up leveled and upskilled because the data is just in a better spot.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think maybe just building on that into the other two data points that we're seeing here. As you mentioned, David, the real demand is for like that sort of mid-level and mid-layer of talent, especially as companies are trying to adopt more AI tools. They're realizing you obviously still need someone who is skilled in accounting or FP&A who can ultimately manage, run, and oversee and check whatever AI agents or agentic tools that they're using in the business. And that's why, so just looking at some of this data on the top, a lot of survey results have shown that 32% of finance leaders recognize FP&A as a big skills shortage they're seeing in their teams. I've even seen similar data on the accounting side, where the senior accountant, which is the more mid-level, there's a huge shortage there. And so it seems like there is a real skills gap. And I think, to your point, David, around the entry level, you don't need a junior analyst anymore, right? AI can sort of do that work. But I think what's really interesting and what is starting to play out is that as that junior analyst gets completely removed, there's just less people that are going to be moving into the mid-level. While at a time when that mid-level is actually becoming increasingly valuable and important, because you need that mid-level to ultimately manage and orchestrate those AI tools. So I think that is the challenge of finding the right people for that mid-layer and mid-level is a big challenge that we're seeing and facing in the market.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think this is a good time to go back to that first poll that we launched, which was like, what is the average size of a finance team of folks that are here today? And what the survey that they're going to put on the screen, awesome, is a little bit over half of the folks on this audience are a team of 2 to 4 people, which is normal size for what we see in the FP&A space. But a quarter of you here today are solo, and I understand that. I've been that solo person, and it always feels like there's just not enough hours in the day to be able to go around. And we're skewing here, but we're actually able to, like, how do you prioritize what's going on and what the most meaningful work is, especially if you're at a venture capital backed company or a private equity backed company. You've got a weird mix of investor reporting requirements. You've always got the next board meeting. You've got forecast cycles you're trying to run. But then you also want to be strategic in the business and not just doing the reporting and analyzing the past, but ultimately, how do you provide value and how do you find that scale and leverage to bring your experience to the table in a way that only you can? So that's where we wanted to kind of start the conversation. I think this group definitely understands a little bit of like what a lean finance team looks like. No one here has more than 10 people on a team, which I've never worked on a finance team that big. I don't know what we would all do, but I think this group definitely understands a lot about being a very lean structure. And so where I want to go there is kind of thinking about what next is. Aman, you kind of hit on this, which is, the old playbook was you're a head of finance, you're going to hire your first analyst. It's going to be a US-based senior finance analyst. That's what you've got in the budget. And they're going to probably handle a lot of the reporting and the board reports and all these things. Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in the market of how firms and companies are thinking about their next hire. And then we want to hear from the audience as well. We've got a little bit of a poll as you think about what that next hire is. We want to know what you all are thinking about for how you're going to hire your next person. And so we'll launch the poll live. But Aman, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from companies that you talk to today.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very relevant conversation, again, in the context of AI. I think the biggest thing, and it comes in different flavors, but all finance leaders are being pushed to think about how can I increase the ROI of the finance function, right? The do more with less is the biggest thing that is top of mind for a lot of finance folks. And so they're obviously going towards AI, but AI is not solving all of their needs. And so we are seeing more and more finance leaders, especially ones that are more sort of forward thinking and tech savvy, starting to think about alternative structures. Like with several of our customers, we're seeing now hybrids of sort of fractional, some part-time talent in addition to full-time FTEs. And the big change that we are seeing, and that we obviously at MAVI are helping facilitate, is building an actual global team, like having a mix of sort of US hires and global hires, which ultimately helps play into and accelerate the ROI and solve a lot of the talent gaps. And so I think the future and modern finance team structure, and I think we probably have a slide that we could share on this, we think is going to look very different, right? The modern finance team in 5 years is going to have a different structure and is going to be focused on sort of really maximizing 3 to 5xing the ROI of what you're spending on the finance function. As we can kind of see here, like the legacy team, like you said, David, a lot of people, older structure. With the new team that we see in the future, you have sort of US based leaders that are sort of overseeing a mid layer of really high skilled global talent, which we have found and exists and have placed with many sort of mid market US businesses. And they are overseeing and orchestrating a layer of AI tooling that is ultimately doing a lot of the execution work. And this structure ultimately, we believe, will lead to a 3 to 5x ROI while still delivering all the goals and the value of the finance function to the company.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You hit on something there too, Aman, which is the hiring and the pace of bringing that senior person on. We're actually seeing being a lot later in the process as well. The old playbook really was, the founders and the CEOs can kind of get the company through the seed round and probably the Series A, and then you start to evaluate, do I need to bring a more full-time person in as I think about raising kind of my Series B? We're seeing that, especially in the fractional channels, that a lot of companies are waiting a lot longer and leaning on fractional CFOs to kind of help bridge that gap, because there's just less of the work to kind of go around and better tooling to help support it. So a combination of more fractional senior level leaderships plus some maybe AI tooling and more global staffing model, we're seeing completely change the way that what used to be on the left side of the screen is actually far more on the right, and even times that finance head is just a fractional component of it, because companies are really thinking about how they're maximizing their investment on the finance and accounting side. We know that everyone needs accounting. You always know that you need to have clean books, especially if you're going out in the fundraise. But for companies, as they decide, am I hiring another engineer? Am I bringing a full-time finance hire on at US salaries? Or is there a way to kind of bring in a hybrid of a more strategic leader in a fractional capacity, plus some global talent? Actually is a really compelling value prop and ROI for the company of just how you deploy dollars today.
Mhm.
So I think that's where we're seeing a lot more on the right side of the screen. And I guess I want to unpack more, and we can pull the slides down of Aman, what do you think is kind of driving this change? You and I both came up through finance functions before, and when you think about what changed from when you and I were doing this job before, is it there's just more data, better data? Is it tooling? Is it processes? It feels like it's changed so much even in the last year.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of big trends and changes. AI is obviously a big one, right? Where the power of AI and what it's able to do, and especially with Cloud Core, it's like getting better sort of every week, every month. I think that is completely changing how finance leaders think about it. I think there is also a lot of top down strategic pressure, like we talked about, from the board, from the CEO, of kind of do more with less. Look, the finance function has always been sort of a cost center. Obviously, finance leaders like you and others I've worked with understand that it actually does drive a lot of revenue and value beyond sort of just managing that the sort of books. But I think it is a cost center. So companies are trying to manage that cost, accelerate ROI. But I think the other big thing that is leading to this sort of shift in thinking about alternative models is that it has just become very, very hard to find a high quality sort of talent at speed in the last 6 years, right? So the massive accountant shortage and even FP&A talent shortage that we're seeing has only manifested in the last 4 to 5 years in North America. It did not exist. Engineering shortage has been around for the last 3 decades, like everyone's known that, but this is a very recent phenomenon in North America. And so in the context of that and the context of technology and sort of pressure from boards, we are seeing finance leaders really start to rethink, what does a modern finance team look like? How should I build this up? And that's where they're leaning more and more towards obviously implementing AI tools for the execution work. But we're even seeing people sort of lean into global talent in a way that I don't think really existed before, right? Sort of legacy offshore staffing models were all sort of lower level, low skill talent, whereas we're placing people who are sort of assistant controller level, the FP&A manager working directly with the CFO. This caliber of talent exists around the world, and a lot of them are also AI savvy. And so because there is this larger sort of density of talent that is US caliber, we are seeing more of a shift towards companies being open to that structure, in addition to incorporating AI tools at the lower levels.
Yeah, I want to come back to the global side because I agree with you. I think there's been a major shift there in how people think and have access to global talent. But I think coming back to, we had asked a poll question a little bit ago of like, what's the next finance hire from this group? And almost a third, a little bit over a third of this audience is actually not making a planned hire today. And I'll say that's not super surprising, kind of like with what we know and what we hear is that, it's tough to get, but it was tough to get budget allocated before to bring on, non-revenue generating or non-code production roles. And then we know now it's even harder as companies are kind of continuing to buy for, the investment on their dollar. The thing that I think about in terms of like how the work has changed from when I started my FP&A career to where we are today is the accessibility of data is so much more available for people and at earlier stage companies than it was before. I remember one of my first heads of finance job, we had a database, and what part of my job was running SQL reports out of the database and transforming it into actually Excel and Google Sheets reports that could be used in our modeling. And today, like, I feel like so many more companies view that as just not acceptable very early on, and because of tooling and because of the access of warehouse and all these semantic layers, like more data is just available at people's fingertips to be able to analyze, and that's taken away a chunk of the work. And then the other thing that I think about is because now all this data is accessible and because the tooling is getting a lot better, being able to cross compare results across disparate data sources and come up with conclusions and let AI play that role of a junior analyst, I feel like has given people so much more time back to be able to be strategic and to be that forward thinking person instead of just like, man, it's Monday and I got to do my board slides and I got to do the leadership slides and this is going to take my Monday morning. That was like, a quarter of my job a couple of roles ago.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And David, that is something else that we are seeing as well with a lot of the finance leaders and companies that we're working with is they are actively trying to make finance a more strategic function as opposed to sort of an operational function, right? Historically, it has been about like, closing the books or just like getting the numbers and like kind of putting together an analysis that hopefully is accurate. But like you're saying, given the increased accessibility of data, with a lot of the tooling that we have with AI and with tools like Aleph, we're able to do a lot of that actual grunt work and the actual processing, which took a lot of time. And now there's more energy being spent on the actual analysis. Like, all right, what are these numbers showing us? What's the additional layer of analysis that we can do now that we couldn't do last month or like previously that is now going to help move the business forward and sort of making finance more of a strategic value driver and revenue driver for the business as opposed to sort of, an operational piece.
Yeah, I think we're hearing a lot from CEOs and founders as well about how their expectations are changing in what they expect from a head of finance. I think before it was, now it feels like the work is very much like when you are a head of finance, it's almost like you're an IC for probably a big part of like where you started in your company journey. And it's not just about, the deliverables, but it's that strategic insight and how are you being a partner to the CEO and the pace of when things are expected to be done and how we're going to be able to report on this and analyze this information and be that partner to the CEO and the board. It feels like this group, especially with kind of seeing the audience that we have on the group of like, it's just you, no planned hires. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Which kind of leads me to our next point, which is around global talent. I know obviously MAVI has a view of the world and like global talent. I think you said something a little bit earlier of like, the old model was very much a global talent was reserved for really large enterprises that had the structure to know how to navigate complex legal requirements in various countries and time zones. And so, Aman, like, catch us up. Like, it feels like that was just like a couple of years ago where offshoring work to handle certain tasks was reserved for the big consulting firms and the big Fortune 500 companies. And it feels like over the last like 5 years that has like truly like been upended. Like, what do you think is kind of like caused that, and how can smaller companies, solo finance people benefit from this change in the market?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that is the biggest trend and catalyst that we are seeing in the market, and obviously we are trying to help move forward. I think about the parallel of if you look at the engineering sort of market, right, for engineering hires, there's been this like what I call professionalization of global engineering talent over the last 15 to 20 years. Even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, engineering was the same. There were sort of these large outsourcing shops that only large enterprises had access to. It was sort of lower level engineering work, and that's all that existed. But over the last 15 to 20 years, we have seen this recognition in a lot of platforms that are finding and giving access to truly Silicon Valley level engineering talent all over the world. That, for various reasons, did not happen in finance and accounting. And I think a big shift of why we're seeing that in the last 5 years is the couple of trends that we talked about earlier, right? That are making it really hard to build and find quality talent at speed today. The big thing being the massive talent shortage. The other thing being the normalization of remote work within the finance and accounting function. COVID obviously, normalized that for finance and a lot of other teams. It wasn't the case before, and so that being normalized, there being a massive shortage, and now with the advent of AI and technology, it's becoming much harder to find the right high quality talent at speed, and so that has created the massive demand. I think on the other side with the supply, I think there have been these multinationals, there have been big four companies, large US based enterprises that have had large offices all over the world, and so these talent pools of finance and accounting have been building that are familiar with US GAAP, that are US caliber over the last 20 years. So essentially now the demand has sort of caught up, the supply has caught up, and that's what we're really seeing is now possible in the market. If someone is working remotely, whether they're in Nebraska or they're in India, it doesn't matter as long as they're being able to add the same value, have the same skill set, and can operate effectively day to day with that team.
Yeah, we feel the same way about tooling. I mean, for a long time, FP&A tooling was really reserved for those same type of big companies that you were talking about. It was
Right.
a massive investment to be able to spin up an entire module of whatever major ERP you're on, and you need a whole dedicated team in order to be able to maintain the system. I've worked at those companies before, and I know there's teams of systems engineers that just manage the tool. And it feels like now there's been such an advent of tooling, especially for smaller companies that are meant to be more nimble and flexible, and being able to deploy this without having full-time resources on staff. That to me, this is kind of that moment that we're seeing in the market, which is global talent has opened up in a post-COVID world. We've realized that there is great talent located all around the world, and time zones matter a little bit less than they probably did before. And now we're putting best in class technology at people's fingertips at a fraction of the cost that it used to. And it feels like we're at this really interesting moment across all industries and all segments of rethinking this playbook in light of all this talent shortage. I see a question from Dale kind of in the chat and in the Q&A, which is, what are our thoughts around kind of the mid and senior level talent pipeline drying up? And, I think my first pass of this is it's changing how people are working, and it's actually deputizing a lot more of the junior folks to step into more senior level work, or those senior level folks are actually stepping back into more IC level roles. But Aman, does that kind of align with what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think great question, Dale. But that point on the mid-level pipeline drying up, there was actually a survey that came out literally last month, which showed that the senior accountant, and the data we showed at the beginning on the FP&A side too, that mid-level sort of is the highest demand right now across companies in the US, and I think broadly North America, because it is becoming harder to find people who are experienced end to end in accounting or FP&A, but are willing to, also able to be more of an IC and, pull up their sleeves and actually get things done and manage the AI tools. So I do think that talent pool is going to get dried up because the junior level folks are getting replaced by tools like Aleph, right? I think that is what they are doing. And if there's less people getting that sort of ground level training, there will be fewer people sort of moving up to that mid level. And that's especially why a lot of finance leaders need to think about alternative models and alternative ways that they can build a robust finance team and structure.
Yeah. And so I think, what I want to make sure we leave this group with is, like I said, of kind of next steps in terms of how they should be thinking about a global finance team. And so, because all these things have changed, and because a lot of our audience is, a solo finance people, one of the questions that comes to mind is well, I don't know where to start. I know I used to post a job on LinkedIn, and I had a recruiter that would help me, and they would source for this level talent in America, and I know how to hire them. Aman, give us the quick level view of how is hiring globally normally different than hiring a US folks, or what are the things that people should start to think about as they explore the idea of hiring global talent?
100%. I think the first thing is to remember that we need to index on quality over cost. Like surely this, working with global talent provides tremendous ROI, but to truly find high caliber talent, um, like everyone should index more on quality. A lot of the traditional legacy outsourcing and offshoring sort of providers provide a very low cost sort of solution where talent are cheap, but it's not the same caliber as your accounting lead or your assistant controller or your FP&A manager who's truly going to run large parts of the function end to end independently. And so I think trying to find a provider or solution to work with that can actually deliver quality at speed, I think is one of the biggest things. And I think the other thing to think about and keep in mind is to really treat them as any other remote hire, right? I think that's like a big thing, which I know, David, you and I have talked about is, um, like I said before, if someone is in the US or somewhere else, if they're working remotely and are productive and are there every day, like integrating them and making them feel part of that in-house team, which is, again, a newer phenomenon that we're seeing over the last few years, allows them to be just as productive as someone you'd hire in the US and feel a core member of the team, and allows it to be very, very productive and effective over time. So I think those are kind of two sort of big pieces. And the third thing that I would say is to really focus on that mid-level of talent. Like I think historically, again, going global has meant let's find the junior level who can do data entry and very low level, low skill tasks. But Aleph is automating those tasks, right? And so that's actually not the layer that they should be looking for. They should actually be looking at the mid-level layer, because the actual ROI and leverage that they can get on their finance team is going to be much larger, both in terms of dollar savings and leverage and value for the actual function, because this person is higher skilled and therefore can add more value to the team.
Yeah,
but David, I'm actually curious because you've done this, right? So like, as a finance leader, so what are your thoughts on this? I'm curious what advice you have of combining AI
yeah.
and this talent.
Over the course of my career, I've had finance teams in the Philippines and India, and actually one of the shifts I made recently was bringing a bunch of the work that we had in our offshore work actually into a nearshore model and up leveling kind of exactly to what you were saying, Aman. My advice as a leader of like your point around like treating them as part of the team, like they are part of the team, right? And whether they're contractors or full-time employees, like the legal distinction doesn't matter, in my opinion. They are part of
100%.
your team. They're contributing to the broader mission and vision of what the finance function is supposed to do to support the business. But I think also comes with that is like a really clear set of expectations. There are going to be different holidays you have to navigate, and there are going to be different time zones, and there are different cultural norms that individuals are going to just need and want different things. And part of why I think being successful, whether you're a US based team or a global team, is defining what your set of norms are going to be. How are we going to operate as a team? How are we going to provide value to the organization? And how and when the work gets done, in my opinion, is kind of irrelevant as long as we have clear expectations that everyone is here to contribute. Here's our expectation of quality across the team. We don't care how you may do the work, whether it's with AI. We hope you use AI or you don't, because you want to learn the first time and then you train the agents. That to me is like the underlying part, which for some finance people is a little bit of a foreign concept of like the culture of the idea of like culture and fostering. But I think all of us here have this idea of professional and personal growth and enabling that next set of leaders. So to Dale's question, like when we find those more junior level people, or that people are willing to take a chance on us and joining your company, that you give them every growth opportunity in order to be able to grow and foster in a safe environment, but knowing you're ultimately going to be able to produce what you need to be able to do your job day in and day out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Any initial kind of comments there?
No, I think that sort of yeah, and would love to get any thoughts from the audience too. But yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I guess David, actually, one question for you that we hear a lot from our finance leaders is how do they think about like advice that they have, like as we're thinking about this modern structure, right, where it's like sort of senior potentially US leaders, combination of or global talent at the mid level, and then AI agents or AI tools at the execution layer. There's obviously so many tools out there. There's new tools every week that are launching. And I think the big challenge finance leaders are facing in the context of limited time and bandwidth is like, what tool should I be using, beyond sort of Claude, obviously. Then how should I be making that decision? So I'm curious, like, what advice you'd have for folks on that.
Yeah, I think this is also related to the question that Owen put in the chat of like, how do you actually give the entry level folks the right tools and training? I'll kind of address those kind of both from our perspective. Is that, we all remember earlier on in our career where we were given a task where we had to learn and grow into something that we didn't know. And I think that model has not changed at all. We should continue to give team members the opportunity to learn and grow. And it's about making sure that they understand the fundamental concepts, whether it's on the accounting side and you know why you're booking a journal entry or why an agent is booking a journal entry, or a financial analyst, that you should be able to get to the underlying number beneath them. Like, those fundamental concepts are not going to change no matter what. And we have to make sure that our job as managers and leaders is ultimately enforcing those norms. Then I think the next part of it is, okay, am I setting this person up to have the right infrastructure or the right knowledge to be able to do that and do that well outside of tools? Do they understand what our business is? Do they understand how we invoice our customers? Do they understand why revenue collections is offset of cash collections? Like, those are the concepts of teaching them the business specific context is the next layer in this pyramid of like developing really great talent. And then the third part is like giving them enough context and enough questions to be able to experiment, to do new things. What a thing that I love to do as a manager is giving them the same tasks that I'm going to do myself side by side. It's not always the most efficient thing, but actually that's how we found that most people love to learn is, okay, Aman is going to give me this unique challenge. I'm going to go do it. I know my manager is going to go do it. We're going to come back at the end of the day and we're going to do a check-in of like what the progress was and ultimately how we delivered on it. Those are the same fundamentals, whether they're entry-level folks, no matter where they are, or ultimately a more senior level person that's working directly with the CEO and founder. So that to me is, I don't care if you use AI or not, or you do all of it, but it all comes down to the fundamentals. And every single person should be able to understand exactly how the business works and the individual nuances so that they can do their job efficiently and effectively.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, I think to, yeah, the other thing that I would be curious about in terms of like best practices to advise folks, yeah, what are you kind of seeing as, or what advice would you have for folks to sort of decide which AI tools to look for on the FP&A side or on the finance side?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, like, there are so many out there. Like, you can truly spend weeks and months evaluating tools, and you ultimately have to choose what you are going to feel comfortable using day in and day out. That is like the conclusion of like how I feel about tooling, is that it should always be a supplement and an augmentation of the work that you're already doing, and that you shouldn't necessarily have to bend or break your existing processes to build around a tool. The tools are here to make your life easier, to be able to help you find and scale efficiency. And it's also about, a lot of times finance isn't the only consumer of data. I saw a comment in the chat of like, a lot of times there's an AI or an IT person that's kind of coming along in the journey for companies of relevant size. But also think about who your audience is. It's department heads, it's board members, it's other members of the leadership team, it's investors that need a monthly update. And so think about how they're going to ultimately interact with the data, how you're going to be able to present information to them in a more efficient way, and then understanding what those processes are and how a tool, whether it's Claude or others, or I just need data moved from point A to point B because that's my biggest bottleneck. That's where I say people should always start in the process. And then it's, okay, how do I do this next great innovative thing using the tool? Or how do I unlock this next insight? Or how do I let the head of marketing have access into their data set so that they can think about retention cohorts and marketing spend and all those like fun things that now like is a little bit more downstream of like the core FP&A tooling.
That totally makes sense. I think that's the biggest thing that we're kind of hearing from finance leaders too, is there needs to be an immediate demonstration of ROI, and the easier it is to sort of integrate into their workflows, the higher likelihood they are to sort of adopt it. And I think Claude obviously has been very easy for companies to adopt, to integrate, and to use, which is why it's obviously sort of blowing up in finance teams. But if they are still looking for other tools to manage large swaths of the finance function, whether it's accounting or FP&A, and I think usability, actual ROI, where like, can I justify the the value being added, the time being saved, the cost being saved by spending on this tool, or the additional value being added, the additional analyses that we aren't currently doing, which are adding value to the business. I think, but that's one thing that we've definitely seen. Obviously, finance leaders, they're very quantitative. Like they don't believe in any sort of fluffy stuff. Like you need to see the numbers. And so if there's a very clear ROI from this specific tool and they can see it and feel it and can measure it, I feel like that's what's leading them to sort of adopt some of these solutions.
Yeah, no, really relevant point. So I know we're going to give people some time back towards the end, but if you've got questions that we didn't answer yet, feel free to drop them in the chat. We've got a couple that are kind of in our queue as well. And Aman, while those are kind of coming in through the chat, where I wanted to think about like the close of our remarks is, help us understand like, where do people go next? Is it I do tooling first, I bring people on first? Like we all know resources are hard to come by. And so what I'd love to hear from you is like, how do you advise a head of finance as they're thinking about, is it buy, is it hire, is it do it all myself in nights and weekends? Like how do you think about answering that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the somewhat cop-out answer is you have to do both, but the sequencing depends on the stage of the business. So I think obviously, for earlier stage companies, and like the point you made earlier, David, that things are being pushed out. You can get farther than you were able to before with tooling, just because of technology and what it's able to do now. And so I think for earlier stage, for sure, I think it's a one-man show. That's what we typically see. But as the business becomes more complex, for VC-backed firms, as they sort of get past the Series A, and there are more demands, there's more reporting requirements, you have quarterly board meetings, and frankly, the business is larger, more complex, and the numbers matter. You need to know on a monthly basis what is actually happening in the business and be able to make decisions based on that. That's where you need additional capacity. And I think the head of finance is trying to focus on the strategic side. And the biggest thing that we hear is like they all want to adopt tooling, and they're like, we don't have time. Like we don't have time to do these demos. Don't have time to integrate them. Don't have time to learn how to use them. And so what we're typically seeing is like they need to sort of bring on some resource at the mid-level, so that once there's additional bandwidth, now the two of them can figure out what tooling they need to bring in place. They can integrate that tooling. They can evaluate different vendors, and can then make a selection of what makes the most sense for the business. But I think, first priority is like ensuring there's enough bandwidth to drive the key priorities of finance forward. And then at the same time, almost creating bandwidth to integrate and build in AI tools that can then be managed. The head of finance obviously should not be the person that is managing and orchestrating all these tools. That's not the best use of their time. They need to be the strategic right-hand partner to the CEO. And so I think they need to think about a mid-level person to bring onto their team who can ultimately help them build out the structure of tooling that sits below them.
I mean, I'll push on that just a little bit and say I disagree. Is that ultimately I do think it is the head of finance's job to own the infrastructure layer of FP&A, because that person is the one that is ultimately held accountable when things go right and or wrong. And so I know it's scary to say like I want to help deputize my person or a junior or senior manager to help me like do this work, or I'm scared to pass off my other work. I would actually argue that tooling is probably one of the single biggest investments that an FP&A tool, like a team, can make. And getting that right can truly be make or break, right? I mean, the decision of how you calculate or forecast AR, which impacts your cash cycle or your cash forecast,
100%.
could be the downfall of a business. And so I'll poke a little bit, and like, unfortunately, I think the answer is like, I need capacity. But I need capacity to maybe do something that I'm doing today that is easy for me to train somebody on, so that I can focus on the strategic. I'm answering this like implementation question and how we're going to treat these specific items, so that we can make sure that the infrastructure layer is correct.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's totally a fair point. And I think depending on the nature and stage of the business, kind of seeing it go both ways. But you're right. Like, they do need to own that infrastructure. So even in whatever decisions being made, they need to be closely involved. And obviously these AI tools can help, increase their bandwidth, increase their capacity. We're just kind of hearing from folks that just don't even have time to sort of think about which tool to go with and choose and what the right, because, obviously it is a big, like you said, it's a big investment, and making the right choice is incredibly important because that will impact the ultimate value that can be added. So.
Yeah, no, that's really fair. And we had a couple of comments kind of come in through the chat of, how do I think about demonstrating value? How do I talk to this about the success of my team to the CEO? We have one last slide that we're going to show, which is just from what both Aman and I are hearing in both of our respective roles, in talking to leaders at companies all the time, is there are clear and demonstrable ways that either scaling your team count or scaling infrastructure to be able to support the organization is ultimately going to be able to help. So, Aman, I don't know if you want to highlight maybe the first one around like the global aspect, and then we can talk about the agent one after that, before we
Yeah.
close it out for today.
Definitely, yeah. So we wanted to show these sort of case studies. These are sort of real customers that we're working with, both Aleph and MAVI, who have implemented or are actively implementing the structure that we talked about, and are therefore really 3 to 5xing the ROI of their team. On the left-hand side with that case study, it's a large SaaS business that we work with. They had a big restructuring, and they essentially replaced a big swath of their both FP&A and accounting team across 6 to 7 hires with really high-skilled global talent from MAVI, which ended up saving I think somewhere around $450,000 a year. So massive sort of dollar savings. And then on top of that, they are actively looking at AI tools for the FP&A side, for the accounting side. And so they are sort of working towards this structure where they've optimized human capital spend, and then now they're integrating AI to truly 5x the ROI of what their finance team can do. But yeah, David, I'll pass it over to you to maybe talk about another example that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, the middle one, everyone talks about agents and AI and what can it actually do. And the way that I think about agents in an FP&A and accounting context is really replacing that lower level junior analyst work that used to be done, whether it was in the US or globally or wherever it is. Once you build the infrastructure and the scaling, is really putting the stress test on how you could have agents actually do a lot of that same work, whether it's updating the model, pulling actuals in through whatever connectors you have, or whether it's helping draft journal entries, or whether it's helping do your monthly variance analysis. There are so many opportunities for AI and automation in general to help take things off of people's plates. And the way that I described it, I wrote a blog post about this a couple weeks ago on the Aleph blog, which was, it's scary to say I don't know where to start, and it's scary to say I don't know what to do. And so the way I think about it is describe one of the most painful things that you do every single month, and while you're doing it, see if you can also work with the AI in the background and say, help me, here's the process I'm doing, do you have the information, and talk to it just like you would an analyst. How am I going to do this process? Do you have what you need to be able to run the reports that you need here? And that to me is where like this AI powered agent really starts to unlock scale and efficiency for teams. So what we have here is, building cash flow dashboards are great, whether it's running that BVA analysis or the variance or the flux. No longer do you have to wait for, day +3 for books to be closed to start running these packages. Man, wouldn't it be nice if I just came in overnight and these things are just done in my voice, in our color schemes, and all these things that just feel so personally branded to the firm and the company I'm at, that it's taking the ability for me to go do that more strategic forward looking thing that I think so much of where finance people want to spend their time, but unfortunately we don't get to spend nearly enough time there no matter what job we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like especially for finance leaders, there are a lot of people on this call where their team is 2 to 5 or they're solo. Like if you're early, you have the opportunity to sort of build the finance team from scratch with the structure that you would want, which I think is a great opportunity. And we are actually working with several customers that are in that position, and they're actively thinking about like, we're going to hire a couple of global people, and we're actively building out these skills in Claude that they are actually just going to run. So like some of the repetitive tasks that they would have done manually, we're going to build skills for that, and they're just going to oversee these skills. And that's going to be how we're building our finance function from the ground up.
It's really cool. I've actually seen companies and firms starting to use Linear, a product management, product engineering software,
awesome.
actually run their month close processes and say, my agent has access to this tooling. Here's the skills that I need. And to me, like, it's so foreign to think about finance being run more like a product and engineering organization, but it's so cool to think about that's how I'm triaging work, and that's how I'm able to give the organization context, and that's how people can see what I'm working on instead of the 8 p.m. Slack message of, hey, where are you at on this? Or, hey, when can you get this for me? Oh, let me create, this ticket. Here's how our process is going to run. Like, I think that's the innovation of the finance function that people just are not talking enough about in terms of keeping things in my notebook and my Slack comms instead of actually like systematizing it and building it for scale. So with that, we're going to give some people some time back. Just want to say thank you for everyone joining our webinar today. Thank you, Aman. Always great insights, and appreciate the conversation today, and really trying to make it more tactical for people as they understand how the changing nature of FP&A and finance across the companies are going. As always, if you guys have questions, feel free, add Aman and I both on LinkedIn, drop us notes. We love talking about whether it's tooling or AI or global hiring. We're really excited that you all took the chance to join us today. If you had questions that you didn't want to drop in the chat or in the Q&A, again, drop us a note. Always happy to chat. But just want to say thank you all for joining us today. We'll send out the webinar recording if you want to share that with other team members, or you want to send this to your CEO as you advocate for that next finance hire. We're always here, and thank you so much for joining, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks so much, David. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining.